Welcome to the Bite-sized Tech News TLDR. In today's deep dive, we are cutting right through the noise to bring you the facts on literally the biggest AI leak of the year.
Yeah, it's honestly a massive one.
Right. I mean, Anthropic is widely considered like the most cautious, bordering on paranoid AI lab on the planet.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, their entire brand identity is built around safety and, alignment.
Exactly. Controlled model releases, all of that. Yet this week, they just accidentally left the digital keys to their most dangerous, completely unreleased model sitting in a public, fully searchable folder.
Which is just wild to even think about.
It really is. So our mission today is to cut straight to the bottom line for you. No conversational fluff, just the facts. We are detailing exactly what this leak means for your daily productivity, the immediate security impact on your company, and, well, the future of AI scaling.
Yeah, we're skipping the polished corporate announcements and looking at the raw, leaked internal blueprints.
Right. And we've got a massive stack of sources for this deep dive. We're pulling technical analysis from Testing Catalog and Befried, alongside hard financial reporting from CNBC, Mint, and the Times of India.
Which is great because it gives us both the architecture side and the market reaction.
Exactly. So let's just propel right into the facts of the leak, establish the baseline of what Anthropic has actually built here.
Yeah, and the sheer irony of this situation, it really cannot be overstated. When we usually talk about state-of-the-art model leaks, the assumption is always corporate espionage.
Right, like a sophisticated nation-state attack or something.
Exactly, penetrating a hardened server. But the reporting from Mint and Testing Catalog confirms this was nothing more than a mundane human error.
A human error.
Yeah, literally a human error in the configuration of Anthropic's content management system. Just a simple CMS misconfiguration.
Wow. So security researchers, Roy Paz and Alexandra Pauls, they basically just stumbled into an unsecured public data store.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And they found roughly 3,000 unpublished assets.
3,000.
Yeah. And we aren't talking about, like, a vague roadmap or a speculative white paper for the year 2028.
Right.
They found the complete draft release materials, internal benchmarks, and safety assessments for a finished, fully trained model. The code name is Claude Mythos.
Claude Mythos. I know there was another name floating around in the leak too, right? Capybara?
Yeah, Capybara is the tier name, which we'll get into, but Mythos is the model itself. And the compute has already been spent. Like, the model is sitting on their servers right now.
That's crazy. I want to focus on the phrasing in that leaked draft blog post, the one that M1 Astra managed to pull before Anthropic slammed the door shut.
Oh, yeah, that quote is very telling.
Right. It explicitly states, and I'm quoting here, "We have finished training a new AI model, Claude Mythos. It's by far the most powerful AI model we've ever developed."
Which is a huge claim.
It's massive. I mean, for anyone listening who uses Claude Opus 4.6 on a daily basis, you already know we are operating at a very high baseline of intelligence.
Oh, yeah. Opus 4.6 is a workhorse. It's a highly capable flagship model.
Exactly. So to see internal documents claiming that Mythos achieves dramatically higher scores in software coding, academic reasoning, and cybersecurity, that demands a real explanation.
It really does. But before we get into the technical architecture of how it actually achieves those scores, we kind of have to talk about how Anthropic is structuring this release.
Because they're basically blowing up their own product matrix.
Totally. I mean, we all know the current tiers. You've got Haiku for fast, cheap tasks.
Right.
You have Sonnet as the daily workhorse, and you have Opus as the heavy-duty reasoning engine.
So where does Mythos fit into that?
Well, the leaked drafts reveal they are introducing a completely new fourth performance tier called the Capybara tier.
Capybara, okay.
Yeah, and it sits directly above the entire existing Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus hierarchy.
Which is fascinating. But let's look at the underlying mechanics of what a tier actually means in the AI industry.
Right. Historically, if an AI lab just feeds their existing neural network architecture a much larger data set.
And runs it for a few more months on a larger cluster of GPUs?
Exactly, you just get an incremental version bump. That gives you, say, an Opus 4.6 transitioning to an Opus 4.7.
But the introduction of an entirely new tier, that signals something else entirely, doesn't it?
It signals a qualitative leap rather than a quantitative one. It implies deep, fundamental architectural changes under the hood.
So the model doesn't just know more things.
No, it processes information using a completely different structural paradigm than the whole Haiku, Sonnet, Opus family.
Okay, I want to push back on that for a second, because the tech industry is notorious for slapping new labels on slightly optimized hardware.
Fair point. It happens all the time.
Right. Like if a car manufacturer builds a slightly faster sedan, they just give it a new model year. They don't invent a whole new category.
No, they don't.
So creating a whole new class, a Capybara tier, it's like suddenly rolling out a concept hovercraft.
Ah.
Is there concrete evidence in these leaks that this is a new paradigm, or is it just a marketing gimmick?
Well,
Because it could just be a way to justify a massive price hike for enterprise users, right?
it could be, but the evidence points heavily to a completely new underlying engine, and the naming convention itself is actually our first major clue.
How so?
The draft explains that the internal codename Mythos was chosen to evoke the deep connective tissue that links together knowledge and ideas.
Connective tissue, that's a very specific phrase.
It is. In a traditional dense transformer model, which is what the majority of the current generation relies on, the system essentially acts as an incredibly sophisticated pattern matcher.
It just predicts the next most statistically likely word based on its training data.
Exactly. But when the draft references connective tissue, it is signaling a move away from that simple statistical regurgitation.
So it's moving toward, like, cross-domain synthesis.
Yes. Think about how a senior systems architect approaches a legacy code base. They do not read the code line by line in isolation, right?
Right, they look at the whole picture.
Yeah, they map the network latency, cross-reference it with their memory of a completely different database migration from 3 years ago, and then synthesize a novel solution.
Ah, okay. So the connective tissue implies Mythos has a structural framework designed specifically for that kind of multidisciplinary reasoning.
Precisely, which is a huge leap from Opus.
Which forces us to ask the obvious question. If Anthropic had to invent an entirely new structural framework to achieve these scores, it means their old framework hit a wall.
It absolutely hit a wall. They couldn't just build a bigger Opus.
And this connects directly to a massive shift happening across the entire industry right now. The Befried analysis of the leak dives into this extensively.
Yeah, Befried made some excellent points there.
We are looking at the undeniable end of the traditional model scaling era. I mean, for the last 4 or 5 years, the entire AI arms race was defined by brute force.
Very much so. From GPT-3 to GPT-4 or Claude 2 to Claude 3, the recipe was brutally simple.
Right. You take the exact same neural network design, you make the physical parameter count larger, you scrape vastly more text from the internet,
You plug in tens of thousands of additional graphic processing units.
and the intelligence of the model reliably scales up.
Right. That paradigm is known as the scaling laws era, and for a long time it was this beautifully reliable mathematical curve.
So researchers could plot out exactly how much smarter a model would get simply by calculating the increase in compute and data.
Exactly. But the Befried source highlights that the physical, financial, and theoretical limits of this brute force scaling are now colliding.
The financial constraints are definitely the most visible. I mean, training runs for state-of-the-art dense models have skyrocketed into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Oh, easily. Labs are burning through capital just to keep massive GPU clusters powered for months at a time.
And then you hit the physical constraints of the power grid itself.
Yeah, that's a huge bottleneck. We are seeing AI data centers that require the energy equivalent of a small municipality.
You literally cannot infinitely expand the physical footprint of these data centers without fundamentally breaking local power infrastructure.
No, you can't. But the most damning limitation isn't the cost or the electricity.
It's the diminishing returns on the intelligence itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. The Befried article points out that we are no longer seeing linear gains. Building a model with 10 times more parameters, making it 10 times physically larger, no longer yields a model that is 10 times smarter.
It sounds like, if scaling is just hiring 10,000 more entry-level employees into a massive warehouse.
Hoping that sheer volume will eventually result in them designing a fusion reactor.
Right. It just creates noise and inefficiency. So if this brute force era is over and simply throwing more GPUs at a dense transformer doesn't work, what exactly is the structural leap Anthropic is making with this Capybara tier?
Well, the sources outline 2 massive architectural shifts that define Mythos. First, a highly advanced mixture of experts architecture.
Mixture of experts, okay.
And second, the embedding of chain-of-thought reasoning directly into the latent space of the model.
Let's break those down, starting with mixture of experts, or MOE.
Sure. So in a traditional dense model like the early iterations of Claude or GPT, Every single parameter in the massive neural network activates every single time you send it a prompt.
So you ask it a complex coding question, the entire network fires.
Right. And if you ask it for a recipe for pancakes, the exact same massive network fires.
Which is incredibly computationally inefficient.
Massively. And MOE architecture changes this by dividing the neural network into dozens or hundreds of specialized subnetworks or experts.
So when you send a prompt to Mythos,
A sophisticated routing algorithm analyzes the request and only activates the 2 or 3 specific subnetworks that are actually relevant to your query.
hold on, I need to challenge the stability of that, because mixture of experts isn't a brand new theoretical concept. The industry has experimented with MOE for a while.
They have, yes.
And the historical problem has always been routing collapse. Like, if the router network makes a slight mistake and sends a complex Python coding query to the creative writing expert.
And the historical analysis expert.
Right. The model hallucinates wildly. Or worse, the model over-relies on just 1 or 2 experts for everything, meaning the rest of the neural network just sits there eating up VRAM doing nothing.
Yeah, that's the classic pitfall of sparse models.
So if Anthropic is betting their entire new flagship tier on OE, they must have solved the load balancing and writing degradation issues, right?
That is exactly the critical nuance here. The Bufried analysis suggests that the connective tissue Anthropic is referring to is actually a massive leap forward in how the routing mechanism itself reasons.
So it's not just a dumb router anymore.
Far from it. Instead of the simple keyword-based router, Mythos appears to utilize a highly complex semantic routing layer that deeply understands the structural requirements of the prompt before it ever assigns it to the subnetworks.
Wow. So it allows for profound specialization.
Exactly. You essentially have a dedicated, hyper-optimized neural network for cybersecurity, sitting alongside a dedicated network for advanced mathematics, all contained within the same model shell.
But they operate independently.
Right. And this dramatically reduces the wasted compute during inference, allowing them to pack far more intelligence into the active parameters without needing to fire the entire massive cluster.
That makes a lot of sense. And that leads into the second architectural shift. Embedded chain of thought reasoning.
Yes, this is huge.
Because anyone who uses AI professionally knows the standard trick of prompting the model to think step by step.
Oh yeah, you literally typed that out.
Right. You force the AI to write out its logic in the chat window so it doesn't rush to a hallucinated conclusion. But the leak suggests Mythos does this natively. Like, it doesn't need you to prompt it.
Natively, and more importantly, invisibly in the latent space.
Invisibly.
Yeah. When you manually prompt a traditional model to think step by step, it is forced to output human-readable text tokens. It has to translate its mathematical reasoning into English words, print them on your screen, and then read those English words back to itself to figure out the next step.
Which is a very clunky, lossy translation process.
Incredibly lossy. But Mythos operates differently. The architecture is designed to generate hidden reasoning tokens, like a continuous internal chain of mathematical states.
So it explores multiple solution pathways internally.
Yes. It evaluates the probability of each pathway and actively prunes the bad ideas before it ever begins generating the final output for the user. It evaluates its own internal logic trees autonomously.
So we're talking about a model that fundamentally shifts compute from the training phase to the inference phase.
Precisely. That's the paradigm shift.
Instead of just relying on whatever patterns it memorized months ago during training, it spends heavy compute cycles in real time, actively reasoning through the problem in a hidden mathematical space.
Checking its own work, iterating until it finds the optimal path.
And it's routing all of this complex reasoning through hyper-specialized expert subnetworks.
Exactly. And when you combine those two structural shifts, flawless, hidden multi-step reasoning with hyper-specialized coding and security experts, you immediately understand why the stock market reacted the way it did to this leak.
Because this architectural leap means Mythos isn't just a slightly better chatbot.
Not at all. The internal leaked safety drafts explicitly admit that Mythos has an unprecedented, almost terrifying specialization in discovering software vulnerabilities.
And this is the pivot point, right? Where the story stops being a fascinating discussion about AI architecture and becomes an immediate top-tier global security crisis.
It absolutely is a crisis. Both the Times of India and CNBC zeroed in on the financial and security fallout of this specific capability.
Because Anthropic's own internal safety and alignment teams, writing in this leaked draft, stated point blank that Mythos is currently far ahead of any other AI model in cyber capabilities.
Which, in the context of internal risk assessments far ahead, is a glaring red flag.
It really is. The draft warns that the model possesses the capability to discover, map, and exploit novel vulnerabilities in software code at a speed and scale that outpaces human security operations.
Let's contextualize what that actually means for a moment, because we throw the word vulnerability around a lot in tech news.
Good idea. Because traditional vulnerability scanners, the tools that enterprise security teams use today, they operate on known signatures, right?
Right. They scan a company's code base looking for outdated software versions or common, well-documented configuration errors. They are basically running a checklist of known mistakes.
But because Mythos possesses this latent space reasoning and the mixture of expert architecture, it isn't just looking at a checklist.
No, it can read a massive, bespoke enterprise code base, semantically understand the intention of the code, map the execution flow, and intuitively realize that if it manipulates a variable in a completely unique way.
It can trigger a buffer overflow that no human has ever documented before.
Exactly. It is generating zero-day vulnerabilities on demand.
This is like someone announcing they've invented a master key that opens every digital lock on Earth. I want to build on that distinction because it perfectly explains the market panic.
Yeah, the market reaction was swift.
A traditional scanner is like a security guard walking around a building checking to see if anyone left a door unlocked. It's useful, but basic.
Right, whereas Mythos operates like an automated, hyper-intelligent lock picker.
Wow, yeah.
It can look at a proprietary, custom-built lock it has never seen before, simulate millions of internal pin permutations in a fraction of a second, understand the microscopic friction points of the cylinder, and mathematically deduce exactly how to pick it.
And it could do this across thousands of digital locks simultaneously.
Exactly. When Wall Street digested the reality of an AI capable of autonomous zero-day generation, they aggressively sold off the entire cybersecurity sector.
The CNBC reporting on the stock movement is honestly brutal to read. The iShares Cybersecurity ETF, which is, a broad measure of the industry's health, dropped 4.5% almost immediately.
Yeah, and the individual heavyweights took massive hits. CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, and Zscaler all dropped roughly 6%.
Sentinel alone fell 6% too.
Okta and Netscope fell over 7%, and Tenable plummeted 9% in a single trading session.
9%. That's huge. The Tenable drop is probably the most illustrative of exactly what the market fears here.
I agree, because Tenable's flagship product is Nessus, which is arguably the industry standard for vulnerability assessment and management.
Right. Their entire multi-billion-dollar business model is predicated on being the best in the world at scanning networks to find weak points so IT teams can patch them.
So if Anthropic just accidentally proved that they have built a general-purpose AI model that can perform deep, structural vulnerability discovery autonomously,
faster and infinitely cheaper than a massive enterprise software deployment.
exactly. The core value proposition of companies like Tenable is suddenly under existential threat. Why pay millions for traditional scanning infrastructure when an autonomous agentic AI can map your attack surface in real time?
But wait, that same logic applies inversely, which is what makes this so terrifying. If the AI can map your attack surface for you, it can map your attack surface for a threat actor.
Oh, without a doubt. And this isn't just a theoretical white paper exercise.
The CNBC source explicitly brings up the historical precedent to remind us how real this threat is.
Yeah, Anthropic previously had to publicly disclose an incident where a known Chinese state-sponsored hacking group successfully exploited their older Claude code tool.
And they used it to infiltrate roughly 30 different organizations, right?
Right. And keep in mind, Claude Code is an older, significantly less capable tool compared to what Mythos represents.
So if state actors are already leveraging previous generation AI for lateral network movement and exploitation, handing them an autonomous zero-day generator is unthinkable.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Which forces me to ask, if the internal safety teams know it is this dangerous, and if autonomous agents make hacking this easy and asymmetric, why does Anthropic even finish the training run?
It's a great question.
Why do they build it instead of permanently wiping the server the moment they realize its cyber capabilities?
That tension gets to the absolute core of the modern AI development philosophy. The Befried analysis frames this really well by connecting Anthropic's actions to the strategic theories of Max Tegmark.
The MIT physicist, right?
Yeah, he focuses extensively on artificial superintelligence. And the prevailing thesis among the major AI labs is this doctrine of inevitability.
Inevitability, meaning someone is going to build it no matter what.
Exactly. Tegmark's underlying argument is that as global compute scales and algorithmic efficiencies improve, these advanced capabilities, like autonomous cyber exploitation, are mathematically inevitable.
So if Anthropic decides to be the moral arbiter and deletes the Mythos project today, OpenAI will just hit the exact same architectural breakthrough in 3 months.
Right, and if OpenAI pauses, a heavily funded, state-backed lab in another country will hit it in 6 months.
It's the classic arms race dilemma. The technology cannot be uninvented.
So Anthropic's operating philosophy is that attempting to hide the capability or pretending the architectural leap doesn't exist is actually the most dangerous possible path.
So the safest play, paradoxically, is to build the weapon, study its mechanics deeply in a controlled environment, and strategically deploy it to the good guys first.
Exactly. And that philosophy perfectly explains the cybersecurity first rollout plan that was detailed in the leaked draft.
Yeah, they're not just going to drop the Capybara tier onto a public web interface for anyone with a credit card to access.
No way. They are heavily gating it. The draft indicates they will restrict early access strictly to vetted organizations that are actively focused on cyber defense.
They're treating the commercial release of the model as a highly calibrated security intervention.
They really are. They are trying to alter the timeline. By handing Mythos exclusively to the defenders, first giving them a head start of perhaps a few weeks or a couple of months.
They're allowing enterprise security teams to utilize the Claude API to autonomously harden their own infrastructure.
Exactly. The defenders can use Mythos to find and patch the 0 days in their own code bases, effectively neutralizing the vulnerabilities before a competitor's equivalent model inevitably falls into the hands of a ransomware cartel.
Or a state-sponsored threat actor.
Right. They are handing the ultimate weapon to the shield makers before the sword makers can build their own.
It is a massive global-scale gamble on deterrence. But while security analysts are bracing for the impact of this new technology, and Wall Street is actively, aggressively repricing the enterprise security market.
The average professional listening to this deep dive right now is probably looking at this from a much more practical angle.
Yeah, you are probably wondering when you can actually use it. How is the most powerful AI model ever created going to impact your daily workflow? What are the immediate, tangible implications for the tools you use every morning?
And this brings us to the harsh reality of the economics of the new Capybara tier.
Because the bottom line for your personal and corporate productivity is fundamentally tied to the compute architecture we discussed earlier.
It is. The leaked documents were remarkably transparent about the financial gravity of this release. M1 Astra highlighted a specific, sobering excerpt from the draft.
What did it say?
It stated, Mythos is also a large, compute-intensive model. It's very expensive for us to serve and will be very expensive for our customers to use.
Very expensive for our customers to use. I want you to really process that phrase.
Yeah.
For the last few years, the AI industry has conditioned us to expect flat-rate, all-you-can-eat subscription models.
Right. You pay $20 or $30 a month and you essentially get unlimited access to the bleeding edge of human knowledge.
But the architecture of Mythos fundamentally shatters that economic illusion.
It does. The testing catalog source provides a brilliant historical parallel to understand what is about to happen to the market here.
Oh, right. They compare the impending Mythos release to the rollout of OpenAI's GPT 4.5.
Yes. When GPT 4.5 launched, it offered incredible reasoning capabilities, but the underlying compute requirements for inference were astronomical.
Because of the sheer cost of generating every single token, OpenAI had to attach a massive premium price point to it.
And as a direct result, it never achieved wide mainstream adoption. Everyday users and even mid-sized enterprise teams simply could not justify the exorbitant cost for routine daily tasks.
I completely agree with that historical parallel. If we look at the utility of this for the average professional, I mean, using a model this computationally dense and expensive as Mythos to just draft a polite follow-up email to a client.
Or to summarize a 10-page PDF meeting transcript.
It's the equivalent of spinning up a multi-million-dollar government supercomputer just to run a basic calculator application.
It really is a profound misallocation of resources. The sheer cost per 1,000 tokens generated by Mythos will force a massive behavioral shift.
Will premium pricing become a permanent feature of top-tier AI, fundamentally changing how we value these tools?
Absolutely. We are witnessing the definitive end of the one-size-fits-all AI assistant. The economic constraints dictate that access to top-tier, Capybara-level AI will shift entirely away from broad, casual public availability.
It will become strictly gated, not just by safety protocols, but by enterprise budgets and highly specific, high ROI use cases.
Exactly. As a professional navigating this new landscape, you are going to have to develop an entirely new skill set. Strict AI workflow triage.
Workflow triage, meaning you can no longer just send every single thought or query to the smartest model available.
Right. You are going to have to actively audit your daily workflow based on cost and capability.
So the routine, low-stakes work writing, standard emails, basic code formatting, generating generic marketing copy, or summarizing internal memos, that must be routed to the cheaper, highly efficient models.
You will rely on Claude, Haiku, or Sonnet for 90% of your day because the inference costs for those models have been driven down so far that they are practically free.
They are fast, capable, and economically viable for high-volume tasks.
And you must reserve the Capybara tier, the Mythos model, exclusively for the absolute highest value, most complex problem-solving scenarios your company faces.
So you will only invoke Mythos when you need to autonomously refactor a massive, tangled legacy codebase without breaking dependencies.
Or when you need to synthesize a vast cross-disciplinary research project that requires deep latent space reasoning.
You have to conceptualize using Mythos the exact same way you would conceptualize hiring a highly paid, elite external consultant charging $1,000 an hour.
Perfect analogy. You do not ask that consultant to format your Excel columns. You deploy them strictly to solve the million-dollar strategic bottlenecks.
And Anthropic's leak makes it explicitly clear that they understand this economic friction is a massive hurdle.
Yeah, the draft notes that their engineering teams are working to make the model much more efficient before any general release.
They are acutely aware that if they launch it globally right now, the inference costs, the literal server electricity and GPU time required to generate each word through the mixture of experts router and the chain of thought pathways would price out almost every single commercial use case.
It is a fascinating bind. They have successfully built the most powerful reasoning engine in history, but the physical laws of compute mean they can barely afford to let anyone turn it on.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of technical and economic ground today, dissecting how a single human error in a CMS configuration exposed the blueprint for the next era of artificial intelligence.
It's been a lot to process, for sure.
Let's distill this down into a rapid-fire summary so you walk away with the absolute most critical, actionable insights from this entire leak.
Let's summarize the core findings.
Here are the three most important takeaways from the Anthropic Claude Mythos leak. Number 1, the shift in scaling. The creation of Claude Mythos and the completely new Capybara performance tier prove that the AI industry is officially moving past the era of brute force scaling.
The competitive frontier is no longer defined just by building physically larger models with more data. The future is dictated by deep architectural leaps in how the models structurally reason, relying heavily on mixture of experts routing and embedded latent space chain of thought.
Number 2, the security threat. The dangers of autonomous AI agents are no longer theoretical or speculative. Mythos's leaked ability to vastly outpace human cyber defenders in discovering and exploiting software vulnerabilities caused an immediate massive sell-off in major cybersecurity stocks.
Severely impacting established companies like Tenable, CrowdStrike, and Palo Alto Networks. This capability has forced Anthropic into a highly cautious, defenders-first API rollout strategy, prioritizing early access for security teams to harden infrastructure.
And number 3, the productivity reality. Mythos is going to be incredibly compute-intensive and staggeringly expensive to serve and use. For the average professional listening to this deep dive, the era of using a single, flat-rate AI tool for everything is over.
You will need to actively triage your workflows, relying on cheaper, faster models like Haiku for daily administrative tasks, and reserving the exorbitant cost of the new Capybara tier strictly for high-value, complex problem solving.
It represents a complete paradigm shift in how we will value, deploy, and interact with machine intelligence across every sector of the economy.
It fundamentally changes the math of our daily work.
It really does. Now, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder as you step back into your day.
Yeah.
We just spent this entire deep dive analyzing how the brute force scaling era is colliding with physical and financial limits.
And how the new competitive edge relies entirely on smarter architectural reasoning and specialized training efficiencies,
rather than just possessing the biggest, most expensive data center on Earth. So consider this. If the barrier to entry for building a state-of-the-art AI model is no longer strictly defined by who has the deepest pockets to afford a $100 million training run on massive GPU clusters,
Could the next massive world-altering AI breakthrough actually come from a small, highly agile startup?
Exactly. If the future is dictated by the brilliance of the routing math rather than the sheer physics of compute scale, are the giant tech monopolies actually more vulnerable to disruption today than they were a year ago? It is a structural shift worth watching closely.
A very compelling question that the entire venture capital industry is currently trying to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture and implications of Claude Mythos. We appreciate you taking the time to cut through the noise and get straight to the facts with us. And remember to check out the Tech News TLDR YouTube channel for our daily video updates on this story and more. Until next time, stay curious and keep analyzing the systems around you.